Welcome to Fancy Sense, my personal finance and productivity channel I created to help everyday people make it make sense. I know I've been gone for a while, but I'm back, and as you all can see, I'm better than ever. Today I'm going to break down the pros and cons of renting versus buying from more of a quality perspective. And then next week we're going to get more into the quantity. I'm going to give you a real world example of whether it's better to rent or to buy. Because I think it's a good idea to end on a positive note, we're going to start with the cons first of renting a home versus renting a home or an apartment or versus buying a home. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the lack of ownership. Long-term renting, you don't have any tangible assets that you have. Of course, you can do other things with your money, but renting for a long period of time doesn't give you the benefits of having a home or owning something long-term. So that's the first con of renting for a long period of time, for an extended period of time or a long period of time. The next thing we're going to talk about is difficult landlords. That could be a con of renting for an extended period of time. Obviously, you just never know when you first move into a place, but if your landlords are difficult and they don't do things like fix repairs in the home, especially if you're renting a house. I've seen numerous times where people rent homes and their landlords do not fix things as they break. So that can be definitely an issue renting long term versus if you own the home, obviously you can pay to get it fixed, and it's an investment in your property versus investing in someone else's property. So that could be an issue. It's not too much of an issue in an apartment, but it could be. So that's one of the cons of renting long term. The next con we're going to talk about is difficult neighbors, especially in apartments. I have plenty of personal experiences from living in apartments where neighbors can be difficult. They can be loud, they can be rude, they can be disruptive, or they can just be not understanding of you sometimes when you're loud. Because I mean, everybody wants to have a small get together at their house and play loud music from time to time, right? Am I the only one that does that? Maybe I am. But it can be very difficult, and if you can't have amicable relationships, then it can really impede your ability to live comfortably. So difficult neighbors is something that can almost be fixed sometimes if you go down and talk to the leasing office, but sometimes there's nothing you can do, especially if you find out about your difficult neighbors at the beginning of your lease. So sometimes you just have to ride that lease out until you can find something else. Now that we talked about some of the cons from renting long term, let's go into some of the positives of renting long term. No long-term obligations. This is the beauty of renting for a long period of time. Well, if you don't have any long-term obligations, then you can pretty much get up and move at any point. That's the beauty of it. If I don't want to stay here, I can go move somewhere else. A lot of times you can break your lease, and then if your landlord is violating your lease, then you have the opportunity to break your lease because they're not meeting their obligations. So that's a positive of long-term renting. No maintenance is the next thing we're going to talk about. I love not having to worry about lawn care or having to worry about fixing things in the apartment if it goes wrong. Fortunately, I have very good landlords, so they are very quick about getting things fixed. So if you can find a place and they're really good to you, then that's obviously a plus, because guess what? You don't have to worry about costly repairs that a homeowner may have to worry about. So that's one of the things I love about living or renting long term. More investing opportunities is the next thing we're going to discuss. I'm going to go into more detail in this in my next video, so make sure you stay tuned because I'm going to look at the numbers. But when you don't have so much of your money tied up into a home, you can invest in other things. Because you don't have to worry about things like taxes, homeowners insurance, or repairs and services that a homeowner would have to worry about. You have more money available to invest in other things, whether that be investing in yourself, investing in your future. It's more expendable income. So those are some of the pros of renting long term. Now let's discuss some cons of ownership. So let's start with the first one: long-term permanent obligations. As I mentioned earlier, when you're renting an apartment, it's I don't have to be here forever. A house, you have to stay there. It's a whole lot harder to liquidate a house because you have to literally sell it. If you can't sell it and you can't make the payments, then guess what? It can go into foreclosure, and both of those processes can be very, very long. So your obligation is more long-term and it's more permanent. So if you're somebody that likes to move around a lot, it may not be the best idea to rent. I know a lot of people who are in the military, they buy homes. and sometimes they have difficulty selling their home when they decide to leave. And then being a landlord to somebody when you live states or in a whole nother country can be very difficult. So that's why it may be more beneficial to rent long term, to rent for short periods of time if you're not somebody that's set on staying in the location you're at for an extended period of time. Maintenance and repairs, okay? I know we mentioned it before. We was talking about how you don't have to worry about maintenance and repairs if you lived in an apartment. It can be a con for a house. Maintenance and repairs can get up to over $9,000. Like, that's the average that they spent, I think, in 2018 on home services and repairs. So that's the national average. So in addition to paying your mortgage, your homeowner's insurance, and everything else, you could be spending up to $9,000 on home services and repairs. Now, obviously, it's going to vary from year to year, but if you're renting, you don't have to worry about that. So that's obviously it could be a con depending on how you look at it. The next con of purchasing a home is that it could be very difficult finding a house for the right price and in the right location. And you want to make sure you're doing that when you're having a long-term commitment. With renting, if you don't like the location, you could just move somewhere else. But if you're purchasing a home and you're making a long-term commitment, then you get into it and then you realize, okay, I don't really like this location anymore. That could be a hard thing, because it's probably going to be hard to sell your house, or you may be so vested into it that you don't have that option at that moment. So it could definitely lead to you not being happy long term. Those are some of the cons of purchasing a home versus renting. Now, like I said, I like to end on a positive note, so we're definitely going to talk about some of the positives of home ownership. So the first thing we're going to talk about is, as I said, if you're buying a home, it's ownership. It's a tangible asset. It's something that you can physically have and you can physically see every day. You can see the fruits of your labor, and it grows over an extended period of time. So it's a great possibility that that investment is definitely going to grow and it's going to be worth more than what you probably paid for it. So that's one of the positives of home ownership. Let's talk about another thing that you can't do when you rent: house hacking. I don't know if any of you all are familiar with house hacking, but house hacking is simply, to make it as simple as possible, it's, comment below if you want me to do a video where I go into more details of it. But as simple as possible is that you just rent out your room to somewhere else. You rent out a piece of your house to someone else. Whether that be if you have a duplex and you rent out the top part, or you have a house and you just rent out a room. It just all depends. House hacking can really work, because if you can get somebody to cover the rent that covers your mortgage, then you could essentially be living mortgage free, which is always a plus. You can't do that in an apartment. So that's definitely a positive to long-term ownership, or like I said before, just owning a home. And lastly, freedom. Like I said, what I mentioned about apartments is when you have neighbors, you have landlords, you don't have a lot of freedom in what you can do. You have freedom to be able to move, but you don't have freedom in what you can do at your house. At your house, if you want to have guests over, you can have guests over. If you want to put political signs in your yard, you probably can put political signs in your yard. You can do a lot more at your home because you are the owner of it than what you can do if you're renting on somebody else's property or if you're renting an apartment. Based on the stuff we discussed today, which do you think is better? Do you think, from a quality perspective, not necessarily the numbers, we're going to jump into that on the next video, but comment below with what you think is better. Do you think it's better to rent or buy? What are some of your gripes you've had from your experience with renting, and what are some of your gripes you had with buying? I would love to know, so we can discuss in the comments. Thank you for coming out today and watching Fancy Sense, where we make it make sense. I'm Fancy. Make sure you follow me on your favorite social platform. I'm on Facebook, I'm on social media, and I'm kind of dabbling in Twitter, trying to get my Twitter fingers up. But since you're here, and you know my next video hasn't came out yet, you might as well watch some of my other stuff. I mean, it's good, you know. You can see the glow up, you know. Just watch it. I'm gonna sit it right here so you can watch